We continue to read the 60th word, which is called various ways of disputes, which the devil leads through narrow paths. Last time, of course, we started talking about the first way of disputes, which concern people at the beginning of their journey. And it is about the first kind of disputes, those people who lack resolve. That is, it seems like they start doing something, like some commandments, some demands, laws, rules, feats. They try to do something, start something, but they do not have the resolve. And further on this topic, Isaak Syrian also writes, therefore, if it is your fate without burden, willingly accept temporary suffering for the glory of God. Then, if you die in the Lord's feet, the Lord himself will crown you and give you the honorable remains. God grants the honor of martyrs. Therefore, as I said earlier, those who were unproductive and weak from the very beginning did not dare to give themselves up to death. In all disputes they turn out to be weak, not courageous. But it is better to say that God allows them to be persecuted and defeated in disputes, because they did not truly seek him, but as if with disdain and mockery, tried to accomplish God's work, because the devil himself initially recognized them and tested them in their help as to what they are like. That is, cowardly, self-loving, and above all they spare their bodies. Therefore, as if a storm drives them, since he does not see in them spiritual strength, as he's accustomed to seeing in the saints. For according to human will he strives toward God and intends to strive for the goal for his sake. Therefore, as if a storm drives them, as it does not see in them spiritual strength, as accustomed to seeing in saints, therefore it corresponds to the will of man strives towards God and the intention to strive for the goal for his sake. And God assists and helps and reveals to him his providence about him. And the devil cannot approach a person or tempt him, if the person does not consent. And God will not allow temptation upon him. For if someone allows themselves to be drawn to comparison with the very opinion and exaltation, or comparison with doubt and uncertainty, then the devil tempts such to temptation. But on the other hand, the questioning and inexperienced ones, he asks of God, similar to the saints and great ones, to test them and indicate that God will not allow them to fall into his hands, as God knows that they do not have sufficient strength against devilish temptations, unless one of the reasons expressed by them. And then the power of God's providence is withdrawn from them. This is the first way of devilish conflicts. We have considered all this before, when we began reading the 60th word. And here essentially, Isaak Syrian repeats the main idea. If a person does not decide to go all the way, that is, he is afraid, then naturally he becomes unable to follow the protecting grace of God, and therefore becomes susceptible to the demonic attacks, which is the main thing that he does, simply frightening the person with the difficulty of the feat, and the person becomes unable to accomplish anything, and actually, in the end, he does not go anywhere, and a person becomes unable to accomplish anything, and actually doesn't really go anywhere. But in this excerpt, there are several remarkable testimonies that, if he is relaxed and has not resolved to surrender himself to death, that is, his time in all endeavors turns out to be weak rather than courageous. It is better to say that God allows them to be persecuted and defeated in their endeavors, because truly they did not seek him, but as if tempting and mocking, they tried to carry out God's will. That is, it turns out that here is a person who has not resolved to fully carry out God's will as it is. If a person has not resolved to serve God as conscience requires, then God deliberately leaves such a person to various temptations from the enemy, which he becomes unable to endure. That is, it as if shows him. For example, he decided to pray. Well, What's the harm in praying once? Who's stopping him? He prayed once. What's the big deal? And prayed again. Prayed a third, fourth time. But at some point, he starts thinking that he should pray every day. Exactly. Pray every day. And he is not prepared for that at all. He prays more or less according to his mood. When he's inspired. When there is no inspiration. He doesn't really. Well. Okay. So what? Well. What will happen if they pray? Nothing will happen. Nothing will happen. That's why he prays precisely because he has such a mood to pray. And it becomes clear to everyone, to God naturally, to the enemy, even the one who condemns. It becomes clear that his prayerful state before God depends on his mood. When he feels like it, he prays. When he doesn't feel like it, he doesn't pray. That's it. And there arises a situation when a person may not feel like praying, but they have to. For example, let's say there is some serious temptation. Illness or sorrows have burdened him, and he needs to pray for a long time, meaning for a certain period. Let's say continuously for 5 to 6, 7 to 12 hours. For example, you must knock on the door of God's mercy. You must pray. So, one evening he prayed diligently for an hour because he was in pain. The illness was hurting him. On the second day, he didn't feel like praying, but he still overcomes himself. On the third day, he can't bring himself to do it. He has no mood. He is completely overwhelmed by it. He goes to pray, but he can no longer pray. So, he goes to sleep. He seems to understand. He realizes that he should fulfill God's commandment to knock on the door of God's mercy. But he can't. Meaning, one must pray daily. Ask for it. And then God will hear you. And you will be healed. And you only prayed once. You prayed once. Nothing happened. And the second time you don't have the strength. Once he prayed. Nothing happened. And a second time you don't have enough strength. And he realizes that actually there's something wrong with him if he doesn't receive healing. He can't even pray. And then he finds himself in such a crisis situation. An internal crisis arises for him. A spiritual crisis. He thinks, why is that? I want to pray. But I can't. I've been praying all day. An hour straight. Why can't I pray on the second day? On the third? Why can't I pray for a week? For example, Seraphim of Sarov stood for 1,000 days and nights on a stone. His determination did not waver. Others, they read the lives of the saints, stood and prayed out of duty, trying to persuade God to fulfill their requests. He can't. He has two ways out of this situation. He can somehow justify himself that ultimately God may have heard him and with one request that he asked for. Maybe one every day. Why can't I pray? Well, if not, then no. It means that is God's will. I have to accept this will of God. So what do I do now? It's upsetting, of course. Not good somehow. Why didn't he hear me? And gradually he falls into some kind of more or less robotic state. Or he grumbles that God didn't hear him on that day when he prayed with inspiration. Or that in fact all this is a lie. No one ever prays for a long time. More or less deepening his robotic, that is, antagonistic state towards God. Well, it's hurtful. Not good at all. Why wasn't I heard? And gradually he falls into some more or less robotic state. Or he grumbles that God did not hear him on that day when he prayed for inspiration. Or that in fact all of this is a lie. No one ever prays for long. More or less to a deeper degree of his robotic state. That is, conflicting with God. He is against God, but he doesn't see it anymore. It's a sad story, but gradually his whole life, it's like fading away in this oscillation, until it finally collapses to zero. Because first, he stops praying altogether. Then he stops fulfilling even some formal signs of faith. Coming to the temple. Maybe he will cling somewhere. Somehow. Say, he will go to the temple once a month or once every 6 months. But in general, what happens is that he completely loses faith. He feels annoyance, irritation towards God. He thinks that God has betrayed him, did not hear him, and so on. Life comes to an end. It's a fiasco. Actually, deep down he understands that he couldn't pray anymore. He couldn't overcome himself, but he doesn't want to admit it. So justifying himself, he becomes an adversary to God and decides, loses this grace of God altogether. And the second option, and this good option, when he understands that he cannot pray on the 3rd day, cannot become, and he understands that he is an unborn person, that he is impatient, unborn, that he actually only prays for his own pleasure, and he is not ready for constant prayerful work. He does not want this. But essentially, to reflect on it further, what does this mean? I want that every time I am inspired, I will ask God to fulfill my requests. That is, my essence. I want God to fulfill everything that I ask him for intuitively and inspiringly. That is, God must be the fulfiller of my desires. However, as anyone who approaches God to serve him understands, he must fulfill his will. That is, he must be able to fulfill the will of God. It turns out that he is not capable of it, because he is impatient, lazy. Because he loves peace very much and absolutely does not like any long-term efforts. And this humbles and crushes him. And he begins to fight for some small matter, but a matter that is done regularly. That is, he understands that the rule is necessary, but the deed is not right. The deed is to always train oneself to pray to God. Specifically, to train oneself, to force oneself to pray to God. If he has a stimulus, if he has an understanding that being with God is not fulfilling his whims, it is not teaching God when you want to pray. It is changing oneself according to the will of God, in order to restore oneself in the image and likeness of God. If he has a stimulus, he develops an understanding that being with God is not fulfilling his whims. It is not teaching God when you feel like praying. It is about transforming yourself according to God's will, in order to restore yourself in the likeness of God. In other words, he starts working on himself and gradually transitions to the second way of devilish temptations. Because in this small, long-term work, he gains patience, gains courage, and understands that in order to achieve anything, one must have patience. In general, a Russian person climbs out of the first level of temptations in this way. That is, he understands either on his own, or reads in the writings of the Holy Fathers. And for this, a certain action and grace are also needed. Or someone like a spiritual mentor reveals to him this thought that one should never do anything on impulse. This is the wrong path. Because then, you are acting from yourself, and people are saved, healed, transformed through faithfulness in fulfilling God's commandments. That is, when you do something you don't like, but because God commands it, because it needs to be done. And when he understands this, when he is ready to do this, for example, small, tiny tasks, then gradually, a foundation is laid for entering the second path of temptations. Although many never even experience the first immediately. Because a person immediately decides and understands what needs to be done, and is ready for patience. And when he understands this, when he is ready to do it, for example, small tiny things, then gradually a foundation is created for entering the second path of struggles. Although for many, the first path never becomes the second immediately. Because the person immediately decided and immediately understood what needs to be done and is ready for patience. But these are, so to speak, ascetic reflections.
They are quite sufficient for any practitioner, for any person who truly lives by the commandments of God. Such people are practically non-existent now. In ancient times, there were many of them. The idea that a person should endure something for God and patiently obey Him in fulfilling His commandments, is currently inaccessible to people. Therefore, no one transitions to the second path of struggles, but a person who currently does not possess, essentially, an ascetic, practical approach to these things. He reasons, mainly reasons, reflects, well, from the perspective of abstract concepts. And how can one understand this situation from the perspective of abstract concepts? Roughly speaking, philosophical constructs. They thought. It's not practical. Practically everything is understandable. For example, ask any of you, any person, do you have to go to work? Is work obligatory? Do you like it? No. And if you don't like it, do you have to go to it? Yes. Is there any other way? No. This is a normal thing that, in principle, doesn't need to be explained. Try explaining this to the modern generation. Why should I? If I don't like the job, I should leave it. I should go to work that I like. If I don't like the job, I should leave it. I should go to a job that I like. That is, I like the people who work there. The work that I do. I like the attitude towards me from the people around me. The salary that is paid. The schedule that does not burden me too much. So I choose a job that suits me in every way. In principle, it's not difficult. I don't have to endure it. I just go and enjoy it. I went to work. Worked for 2 hours. Got 150,000. Wonderful work. Nice. There. Almost did nothing. Smiled. Looked at them. Looked at their stuff. Played a couple of times in the corner. And then saw that my salary had been paid and went on to relax. These are the views of modern people. That's why they find it so difficult to work. It's hard for them because they don't understand that work is just a word work, and a word from Arabic. But essentially they are cognate words, and you have to work for work like that. You have to obey the conditions. Comply with the conditions. The circumstances. The people. The work conditions that exist. And therefore, in terms of work, it is difficult for modern generation. Many. And as for marriage, I won't even mention it. There is basically no marriage to maintain. Because, how is it possible? What do difficulties have to do with marriage? It should just be a red carpet. Then it makes sense when the red carpet ends. Well, then the marriage should end. That's how young people see it. Because they couldn't sing. They can't. Here is when it makes sense. When the red carpet ends. Well, and the marriage should end. That's how the young people draw it. Because they couldn't sing. They can't. But even those who understand this about work, they no longer understand this about spiritual life. Here. It's like this thoughtfulness can be useful. What does it mean? After all, the first main commandment from God says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your thoughts, with all your strength. You must love God. If I stand in prayer, only when I like it, only when I am inspired, I don't love God. I don't love. Well, how can I not love? I am standing. Right. No. You just like it now, and you stood for prayer. And if you don't like it, will you follow God? Will you pray if you want to sleep? If you want to eat? If you are in a bad mood? Will you talk to God? No. I won't. So, you don't love Him. So, you communicate with God only when you feel good. When it's pleasant for you. When it's a giving for yourself. Like in modern family life. That is, I talk to my husband only when I want to. When it's nice for me to talk to him. And he starts talking about his work. Then I'm not interested at all to listen to it. I have a headache. And I'm sitting on the internet. I have urgent conversations there. Dialogue with a friend. And he starts talking about these crankshafts, or something incomprehensible. She's on. My head hurts. And here I am sitting on the internet. I have urgent conversations. A dialogue with a friend. And here he goes with his stories about something like crankshafts there. Or who knows what. So, do you not like him? What do you think about yourself? What do you think? Are you doing what you like? Are you building a life out of what you want to do at the moment? If you want to fast, do you fast? If your stomach hurts, do you say, I won't fast because it's difficult? If you feel like praying, do you pray because it feels good to you? You do it for yourself. It feels good to feel that you prayed to God. It feels good to read the Gospels because there is some wise thought in there. And just a good mood. And then for 6 months go around telling everyone what you read in the Gospel 6 months ago. Well, since your will is the source of prayer, you do what you like, not what you should do. After all, joint life is just when we force ourselves to do what we don't want to do because we love another person. Because we value communication with them. Because it is precisely through obedience that any love is preserved. If I come to God only when I need to, when I draw strength and courage from it, then in fact, I come only of my own will, for my pleasure. And there can be no love, no fulfillment of the commandment, no divine love, if I come to God only when I need to, when I draw strength and motivation from it. Then in reality I come only by my own will, for my own pleasure, and there is no love, fulfillment of the commandment, God's love in it. So, in reality, I do not love God, and all temptations that arise from not being patient in any matter before God show that you do not truly love God. You live only because you like doing this or that. You need to understand why you do this, what you do it for. But if you do it only because you get some positive emotions from it, then you do not love the God you serve. These are simple things that a person should understand. But he does not understand them because he does not feel. A person is always and unconditionally sure. People living family life do not know this. He is always and unconditionally sure that he loves another person. Why does he speak this way himself? Deciding, since I live with him, I do something. Cook, clean, tidy up, bring things, welcome home, talk sometimes. And the person has a clear idea that he loves. But when another person intrudes into his personal space, he says, I want to go for a walk now. And he says, I don't want to. And I want to have dinner now. You should have said earlier. And I want to go to my mom's today. I have other plans. Why does one's own say, I will decide what to do. As I live with him, after all I do something. Prepare, wash, clean, bring food home, talk sometimes. And the person has a clear idea that he loves. But when another person intrudes into his personal space, he says, I want to go for a walk now. He says, I don't want to. I want to have dinner now. You should have said earlier. I want to go to my mom's today. I have other plans. So, in reality, we carry out certain things that are easy and pleasant for us. Bring us certain dividends. Either we love to cook, for example, or we want to eat ourselves, or we simply like to acknowledge that I am a good hostess. Whatever it may be. But it is all done for me. For myself or for myself. I do what I would do anyway. More or less beautifully. Secondly, it is simply not difficult for me. I cook because I cooked before he came. And he will leave tomorrow. I will cook with Robuto. Just like I cook. And nothing will change in my routine. I maintain order not because I want to please my husband, but because I like living in order. I dress up, not because I like my husband looking at me, but basically because I like it when people look at me. But usually a person does not observe themselves so deeply. They just understand that they do some things. And someone intrudes into all the other space. And they put up blocks. Meaning they do pleasant things and avoid doing things that require cutting off their will and obedience. I tidy up not because I want to please my husband, but because I like living in order. I dress up not because I like it when my husband looks at me, but because, in general, I like when people look at me. However, A person usually does not observe himself so deeply. He simply understands that he does some things, while some other entity intrudes into all the remaining space, and he puts up blocks, meaning he does pleasant things and avoids what requires cutting off his will and obedience. Love is fixed in obedience. But a person is not prepared for obedience. He came to God to listen. First of all, he likes himself when he prays because at the moment of prayer, he realizes what a great prayer he is. It feels good to be considered a great prayer. He prayed for inspiration. There were no obstacles. Satan did not interfere. Why should he? Let him amuse himself. The person, he prayed, experienced some feelings, consoled his conscience, saying, I prayed to God. I feel good. Wonderful. I am satisfied with myself. My God is pleased. I have peace in my soul. Everything is fine. But if God comes in that moment and says, go and do what I want from you, he will start to close up to himself because, in reality, he does not love. He exists only in the illusion of love, in the illusion that he serves God. Because both love and service to God begin with obedience. When God comes at that moment and says, go and do what I want from you, he will start to close in on himself. Because in reality he does not love. He only arrives in the illusion of love, in the illusion that he serves God. Because both love and serving God begin with obedience. Obedience is when we do what we don't like. But we trust the person. We believe in the person or in God. We trust or cherish the relationships we have established with that person. That is, when we, for some reason, set aside our will, give up our will, and do what the person dear to us asks and loves to do. Moreover, in relation to parents, people are better at this than in relation to God and spouses. Because somehow, in reality, when parents grow old, there is a deep attachment to them within us. We know our whole lives, and there is often gratitude. But it's a kind of emotional feeling, and it turns out that a person is unable to serve love. He loves his mom, but he'd rather she didn't call. He highly values and sincerely thanks God for her. But when she calls and says, come help me, he gets discouraged and irritated. But this is when he must understand that yes, he has emotional attachment, but he does not have love. Because attachment and love are not quite the same thing. But it is precisely then that he must understand that, yes, he has emotional attachment, but he does not have love. Because attachment and love are not quite the same thing. A person can. A dog can also become attached to a person. Animals also become attached. It is a spiritual action. But love is an act of will. When I cut off my will, refuse what I like, what is convenient for me, what is good for me, in order to do what another person needs. And the very first armor, the very first step, that a person tries to climb in relationships with God, is to understand that the relationship between me and God should be built in the paradigm of the first commandment of the law. That is, to love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your mind, with all your strength. That is, I should always think about God, always strive with my mind towards God, always experience everything in His light, in love and in relationship with Him, and with strength. That is, always be ready to fulfill what He tells me. This lies on the surface, but only as long as you hear it. As soon as you step out beyond the limits of this room and encounter any difficult and not difficult ordinary adventure, this thought immediately leaves your consciousness. It does not stick in the human consciousness. As long as you hear it and agree with it, it sits there. As soon as you step out of the influence of the speaker, out of the influence of the reader, this thought immediately leaves you and you build your life completely differently from within yourself. As soon as you step out from under the influence of someone speaking, from under the influence of someone reading, that thought immediately leaves you and you begin to build your life completely differently from within yourself. And so, for a person striving to live with God, just beginning to live with God, trying to establish a relationship with Him, he doesn't understand it. He lives as if imagining his relationship with God sinfully. That is, in darkness, gloom, incorrectly. He believes that there is a God who should help him. That in reality he came to church so that God would come to him. So that God would help him, inspire him, fulfill some assumed commandments, and that God would somehow participate in his life. And this paradigm of relationships is fundamentally incorrect, fundamentally wrong. But a person must live a certain experience in life to understand that this incorrect relationship with God is fundamentally wrong, completely incorrect in principle. But it must be lived. God accepts this person and begins to work with him, begins to teach him, showing with the help of scattered house of cards that you are doing everything wrong. It is precisely then, when we cannot achieve what we say, when we are surrounded by temptations. Now I eat. Now I hum. Now I look around. Now I get angry. Now I shout. Now I don't want to pray there. Don't want to go to church. Nothing seems to work. I'm struggling, 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 and nothing works. It's precisely at that moment when we can't seem to achieve what we talk about, surrounded by temptations all around, that we indulge, sell, watch, act up, scream, and even don't feel like praying, don't feel like going to church, feeling like we just can't do certain things. Nothing seems to work out. It's like we keep struggling and struggling and struggling, and yet nothing works out. It's all not by chance. And in reality, it's not because God is angry. No, it's just like a wise, attentive, yet strict teacher making you learn. See, a modern teacher doesn't force you to learn. So the child leaves and schools remain uneducated. They come in a certain way in first grade and leave in 11th. Sure, they get grades, but usually not for knowledge, because no one demands it. They don't even make them memorize multiplication tables. Why is there always a calculator on the phone? It can always do 2 times 2. The calculator won't lie. Why memorize poems when you can just click on it and have Google read it out loud for you? Recite the poem, or even have it performed by whoever you want. They will do it all for you. And it may seem like what's the point of the situation itself? But a demanding teacher understands that a person must acquire certain knowledge. And that's how God, like a wise teacher with a capital T, takes a person and educates them. You must understand that everything you bring to the church, it's all wrong. Not because you're sinful. All the sinners come. You must understand that everything you brought to the church is wrong. Not in the sense that you are sinful. All sinners come. You came to the church incorrectly. You came to the church essentially to do me a favor and leave everything as it is. And if you ask me to fulfill what you need, and get upset if I don't, this is a wonderful thing. But it has nothing to do with a person's salvation. Because salvation lies in loving God. That is salvation. People think and reason that salvation is when He loves me. I have finally learned that God loves me, and there is no salvation in it. God loves everyone. Those who know it and those who do not. Those who love Him and those who hate Him. But it doesn't give anything. Eternal life is my love for God, not His for me. His love never ceased, but we fell because we stopped loving Him. And He came so that this love would return to us, so that it would be rekindled. And we must understand, accept this first, most important principle, that we came here to love God, to learn to love Him, to ignite love for Him in us. That's why the first stage for us is like a pancake to the ears. Because we didn't come with that, nor do we know how to approach it. And therefore, nothing works out. Because we have come not for that, nor know how to approach it. And therefore nothing works out. And hear God in various ways. So, let's say, I do not know how to save myself. Without reading the sacred description, I do not know. Honestly, I will say, something should be read. Of course. Let's say, in the abundance of saints, surrounded by holy people, spiritual fathers, like some Fivoidia Egyptian or Fivoidia Russian. Probably there is no need for this. But since we are not surrounded by experienced spiritual fathers, experienced mentors, I do not know how to save myself if not to read books. First of all, the Gospel. First of all. And so, reading the Gospel. Maybe not every day, but occasionally. Still trying to find God in our lives. Constantly picking up the broken pieces of our dominoes. Our broken card houses. Our shattered imaginary castles. We understand that the point is that our house, as Christ says, is not built on a rock. It is built on sand. And therefore, everyone, and to the newcomer, remember how this same three-piglet fairy tale. That's it. The same thing. We need to build a house on a foundation. We need to build fundamental houses. And God constantly sends this wolf to break our little houses. Once broke. Twice broke. 3 times broke. The 5th time broke. On the 15th, we cry out, Lord, die. What is the matter? What should we do so that the little house does not break? That's it. And again, turning to the scriptures, we suddenly understand. Behold, I must love God. And again, turning to writing, suddenly we understand. Oh, this is it. I must love God. And I do love him. Well, if I have sinned, I would probably pray 24 hours a day. Of course, I cannot pray like that, but I can remember him 24 hours a day. And most importantly, I must not only remember but feel. And I must do what he tells me. Not just tell him what I want to say. I must obey him. And in the scriptures. All this is partially in the gospel. Partially in the apostolic epistle. As one reads all this, a person finally discovers that the most important thing is obedience and begins to do something. At least, for example, fulfills some commandment. For example, tries to forgive their wayward husband for being an unbeliever, smelly, rude, unhelpful, and a drinker. It is necessary to forgive him for all his sins in life, and then some foundation will be laid. And a person begins to fight not to pray for their own pleasure. They start coming to prayer to fulfill God's commandment. Help me forgive this person. And then their prayer will not be out of inspiration. If they feel like praying, they pray. If not, they don't. They understand that if they do not forgive this person, they are not a Christian at all. Because Christians begin with forgiving everyone. I must forgive. I cannot approach Christ until I forgive everyone. I must forgive. I cannot approach Christ until I forgive everyone. I will be forgiven if I forgive everyone. The prayer from China revealed this secret to me. I am beginning to pray to specifically forgive this person. And you understand that until I forgive, there is nothing. No life. Just an illusion. I haven't even begun to love God. And here he starts coming every day. I don't want him to. Initially, I hate this person. I despise him, and I don't even know why I should pray to forgive him. I'm not angry. He just has eyes. We wouldn't have seen him. Not in a dream. Not in reality. I walk around trying not to run into him in the hallway. But in general, I treat him normally. I prepare food. I wash. I tidy up his things. I try to avoid him. But I can deceive myself that I don't hate him. But the longer a person prays, the more persistent he is, wanting to fulfill this commandment, the more sharply he realizes that he is lying to himself. Lying. He doesn't love him. He doesn't love God who loves him as a spouse. He doesn't love anything in this life. He's just used to living as he pleases, not fulfilling the commandments of God. Then he starts coming to prayer every day, praying not for 5 minutes, but not for 15 minutes, and feeling exhausted because he understands that everything will perish if he is unable to fulfill this one commandment of God. Then he begins to come to prayer every day, praying not for 5 minutes, not for 15, and feeling exhausted because he understands that everything will perish if he is not able to fulfill this one commandment of God. And gradually, he fulfills it. Not he fulfills it, but God comes down changes his heart, and he understands that what seemed impossible, to forgive an impossible person with whom he has lived for 45 years, turns out to be possible in God, in Christ. This is possible, but ahead lies a field that has not yet been plowed. But he understands that in reality, if one prays patiently, if one asks patiently, then eventually all commandments can be fulfilled. You just have to ask. But now he does it not because he is in the mood or not. He understands that if he does not pray, he will not be able to fulfill any commandment. He will not be able to be obedient. Everything has passed. For someone maybe half a year. For someone, 20 years. It all depends on different circumstances. But in the end, the person understood that the main thing in this life is the patient forcing of oneself to fulfill what God has said. When he accepted this with his mind, meaning it became an absolutely unshakable thought for him, which never leaves him, that the whole meaning of life is to do the will of God. Everything else is insignificant. This person has passed the first stage in his life. He has climbed the first step. He has passed through the first gate. He's entered into some kind of different relationship with God. A right relationship with God. And accordingly, he will have a different way of dealing with the enemy. He climbed up the first step. He passed through the first gate. He entered into some other state of relationship with God. The right relationship with God. And accordingly, he will have a different way of fighting with the enemy. Because a person understands, has already understood along with this thought, which he accepted, that it does not matter what you want. It does not matter what you like. It does not matter what you consider right, what you consider wrong. What matters is how everything relates to God, what he considers right, what he calls right. And it is important to do exactly what he believes is right. Only that way you will live. You escape, and the death in which you annihilate. That is. This is some completely not just a separate thought that came. That's.
Here's the translation of the text from Russian to English start. And this, precisely, is the state, I would say, the state of mind, when the mind unwaveringly knows that the meaning of life is to fulfill his will, the only purpose of life. There will still be a lot of unpleasantness, sorrow, understanding. A person may mistake for the will of God what is not. This is natural, because he is still on the path. But if he has accepted it, he has passed the first stage of temptations. Here is another thought. Another thought. Therefore, and therefore, as Satan drives them like a storm, since he does not see the spiritual force that he is accustomed to seeing. Because in accordance with man's free will he strives towards God and is intentional in striving towards the goal for him. And God assists and helps and reveals his thoughts about him. That is, they say, in the global language of theology, this is what is called synergy. But this thought is important to us. That is, to the extent that a person strives towards God, to the extent that he makes his aim his striving towards him, to that extent, God reveals his thoughts about him. That is, if, well, those are just beautiful words. But, in reality, it does not look that way at all. And, unfortunately, well, at least I do not know what to do with this. Here comes a person who says that despite believing and praying, everything in his life is bad. Some series of sorrowful, unbearably sorrowful circumstances. And he claims that he prays. And he claims that he prays. Well, undoubtedly, he will not lie. That is, he does some kind of prayer actions in one way or another. He does. He may read about the cafe. Then he can simply read prayers that are printed there about healing or about help in these family situations. Or he reads Psalms or something else. Yes, he does all this. And he may even try to read it really attentively. But nothing happens. And nothing happens precisely because God's consideration of this person is congruent. It is proportional to how sincerely the person strives towards God. Do you understand? Do you understand? Do I want to be healthy? Or do I want God? Do I want to be rich? Or do I want to be with God? Do I want to have a happy family? Or do I need Christ? Do you understand the difference? So, we want to have a happy family, and when we have God, we don't need Him. That's why the family is unhappy. We want to have a healthy body, and our loved ones to be healthy. And when everyone is healthy, we don't need God. Why would He help us if it pushes us away from Him? Do you understand? So, He would be happy to help. But then, we would be worse off, not better off. People hesitate and say, "Why do I pray if my illness still doesn't heal?" Because that is the only way to keep you in prayer. Yes, because it is the only way to keep you in prayer. When you are healed, you will stop praying altogether. You won't need God. You won't come to Him. You want to receive communion. And even though you strive towards Him, it's only because you are sick. Do you understand? But people just don't want to accept this. They think, I pray, I fast, I read the gospel, I go to church. Why isn't anything improving? It's because you want things to get better so you can live your life peacefully. But the gospel principle is the opposite. Seek first the kingdom of God, and all else will be added unto you. You seek God. Say, I don't care what I have, as long as you are with me. And then suddenly everything will fall into place. When a person says, it doesn't matter if I'm healthy or sick, I want to be with you. And they will receive what they may not even think or expect. Maybe not even health. But it doesn't matter to them. They are now healthy, not sick. They are with Christ. And the most important thing for them is that they have found Christ. People just don't understand this. It's not even about their faith. They might think, do I believe too little? Do I believe poorly? No. Strictly speaking, it's just beyond that. You approach God as if you were approaching a secretary in Soviet times. Say, Stalin. For example, Stalin can solve 6 of his own problems. How would you approach a witch in pre-Christian times, wanting to obtain something? But the essence of life is for Christ to be in your life, for you to love Christ. And in reality, you don't love Him. You want to use Him to get what you need. If you were to go back to pre-Christian times and ask a sorcerer for something, you would need to receive it. But the essence of life is for Christ to be in your life, for you to love Christ. And if you don't actually love Him, you just want to use Him to get what you need. No. He must be significant to you in and of Himself. Even if He doesn't give you anything, He should be everything to you. And when you seek the kingdom of God, which means having a relationship with Him, living in Him, obeying Him, then He will give you what you truly need for life. As soon as you start seeking what you need, forgetting about Him, you lose everything, because He is the essence of all human intentions and goals. That's why there are so many unhappy people in the church. Not because God doesn't hear them, or because He has stopped helping, or because people have weak faith. It's simply that they can't understand that relationships with God are not built on functionality. God is not a vending machine that fulfills our desires. And in fact, it's not even about Him. It's about His desire to save us, not to make our lives happy. He would be happy to make our lives happy, but they can only be happy when we love Him with all our heart, all our mind, all our strength. And when we love Him, then everything else may or may not happen. But everything that is truly necessary for carrying out the work of the ministry to which God has called us will be there. And that will be important and essential for us. And when we love, then everything else may or may not be. But there will be everything that is really necessary to carry out the activities of the service to which God has called us. And this will be important and essential for us. Because of this, All people suffer. It is simply necessary to understand, to accept this thought of the gospel, about which we all spoke, that I came to church in order to meet Christ here and learn to love him. When a person takes this goal and understands that the most important thing in life is to fulfill God's will, and will do everything in his power for this, then everything else will gradually, not immediately, come together. Because immediately, that person may see in this some kind of magical action and weaken in love for God. But this is already the second temptation. Well, and finally, I will also note the newcomers, if they are simple and inexperienced, are not tempted by Satan either. They don't understand anything. They don't know anything. They don't know how to do anything. They haven't read the gospel, haven't read the ladder, and haven't read Isaak Syrian. They don't have a spiritual father. They don't understand the liturgy. They don't understand the gospel in the church Slavonic language. They are afraid to approach the priest because he is strict, severe, with a tangled beard, because everyone cries to him in confession. It turns out that they are completely dark, hopeless, people who don't understand anything, but they are strongly protected by God. Why? We are only talking about simple and inexperienced people. And then the preceding paragraph. Next, the devil cannot approach a person or tempt him if the person does not give in, or if someone allows themselves to have comparing thoughts of doubt and exultation, or thoughts of doubt and indecision. Then the devil tempts such people as these. The devil cannot approach a person or tempt him if a person does not exalt himself or allow himself to entertain thoughts of doubt and self-aggrandizement, or thoughts of doubt and double-mindedness. Then the devil tempts such individuals. That is, if a person is simple and inexperienced, it is natural for him to consider himself in church as completely unaware. Remember your feeling when you first crossed the threshold of the temple. Everyone here seems so experienced. Everyone knows, and yet they can do nothing. They understand nothing. Lord, died. Do not leave me and do not forsake me. But as soon as a person becomes established, finds his place, occupies it, stands firm, so to speak, and starts to say, you don't stand right, you don't look right, you don't make the sign of the cross right. And as soon as he thinks that he is already experienced because he has been going to church for a whole month and knows how to do everything correctly, immediately he falls under the temptation of the enemy. But if a person has been going to church for 30 years but considers himself as completely unaware and inexperienced, then God never leaves such people. From them come and have come in the past good believers, good righteous people, good simply pious individuals, remarkable people, who simply retain that feeling of simplicity and inexperience with which they once came to church. They simply preserved it, and God preserved them. That is, we perish when we leave ourselves open to the actions of the enemy precisely when we begin to teach someone how to live. That is, we are ruined, left to the enemy's actions precisely when we start teaching someone how to live. So, if I am teaching another how to live, then I am now experienced. I am experienced now. That means you have already allowed yourself to be conceited about being experienced. Teaching others about life. Well, you must immediately show the person how experienced you are. But God leaves a person to be tempted so that they may be humbled and not teach anyone, knowing their place and walking in a state of simplicity and inexperience. I know many, well, quite a few people, who have been in the church for at least 15 to 20 years and have miraculously preserved this feeling. And they have never experienced any terrible falls since they came to the church. God has never abandoned them, and they have always walked as if in a state of joy, love, and patience, because they came as they were, sure that they know nothing here, understand nothing, and now everything will be explained to them. That's all now. But